Much of what you do in the Revit environment is context sensitive. What I mean by that is when you're manipulating certain objects or when you're executing certain commands, the interface will actually change to reflect the context of the command or the object that you're manipulating. The two places where you're going to see this happen most frequently is on the ribbon and on the options bar. So let's talk about those two critical interface elements here in this movie. So let's start with context ribbons that will appear when you select objects. So I'm going to go to the Modify tab here first, and I want to show you what the default Modify tab looks like. So this is the default Modify tab when there is no command active and when there are no objects selected. So we have our Properties panel, our Clipboard panel, Geometry, all the way over to Measure and Create on the far right side. If I come into my model here and I select an object like this roof here, notice that the left-hand side of the Modify tab remains exactly the same, but we now get an additional Mode panel on the far right, and the whole thing tints in this sort of greenish color. If I click away from that to deselect, that context portion will disappear, and the Modify tab goes back to saying just Modify. Let me select another object and show you again. Here's the door object on screen. Notice now the Modify tab says Modify Doors, and we get a couple different buttons that appear that are related to the context of the selected door. So in other words, each of those buttons on the context portion of the ribbon would pertain to the selection. So we could pick a new host for the door, for example, or we could edit that door family. And you're going to see that depending on the kind of object you select, you may get more or fewer of these context-sensitive buttons. So we get several buttons when it's a group, but maybe only one button when it's a topo surface, for example. So it will vary depending on the object and what commands are available. Now, the other place where you're going to see similar context buttons is when you're actually creating objects. So if I go to the Architecture tab and I just click the Wall tool, for example, notice that that takes me to the Modify tab. And again, the left-hand portion of the Modify tab is exactly the same as it was a moment ago, but then we get that context-sensitive portion off to the right, and it now says Modify Place Wall instead of just Modify, and we get all the draw shapes over there on the right-hand side. Now, in addition to that, when I'm in the Wall command, I'm also getting a whole collection of options available on the Options bar. Now, the Options bar is that big slot of space there directly below the ribbon. Now, if I come over here and I click the Modify tool or press Escape twice and cancel completely out of the command, notice that the Options bar is now completely blank. So the space is still there, but there are no options available because I'm not doing anything. Now, sometimes when you select an object, it will put options on the Options bar. It didn't do it with the door. It didn't do it here with the roof. But in some cases, you will get options that will appear on the Options bar. Like when I select this topo surface, I get the Activate Dimensions button. But more often than not, the Options bar gets populated when you're creating objects as opposed to when you select existing ones. But in either case, you really want to pay attention to what displays on that Options bar and on those context-sensitive ribbons while you're working, because all of those tools are going to be highly sensitive to what it is you're actually doing. So it's changing all the time. And so after a while, you'll get used to that. But certainly initially, when you're learning Revit, you want to pay close attention to those interface elements so that you know what features and options are available to you as you work.